Hi there, my name's Alan Hepburn, and in this video we'll look at a plan to get a non-instrument rated pilot out of a trap that has killed a good number of VFR pilots over the years, an unplanned excursion into cloud. These accidents are particularly common at night for the simple reason that you can't see clouds in the dark. Most pilots nowadays have had some exposure to instrument flying during their training, but we are told that the average VFR pilot has 178 seconds to live if this happens to him. I suspect that what happens is that, with no plan to get back into visual conditions, panic sets in, and the pilot either loses control of the airplane or starts an immediate descent in the hope of seeing the ground before he hits it. The plan I'll describe to you will dramatically improve your odds of survival if this happens to you. My first memorable encounter with cloud happened on my second night cross-country flight after I got my night rating. At the time, I had a grand total of 70 hours and 15 minutes in my logbook. My route was from Prestwick to Glasgow, Scotland, on the 7th of February 1969. The distance was all of 22 miles, over some pretty desolate moorland country. I'm probably here to tell you about my experience all these years later, thanks to my flight instructor, who a couple of months earlier had shown me how to fly a surveillance radar approach, even though this was not in the night rating syllabus. In these days, traffic surveillance used only primary radar, and as I got near Glasgow, ATC asked me if I could climb to 3,500 feet so they could see me on radar. I said I thought I could. When I leveled off, I could still see some lights on the ground. They then asked me to make a turn onto a new heading so they could see the target they thought was me turn and confirm it was indeed me. As soon as my wing went down in the turn, all the lights on the ground disappeared. I was in cloud. ATC confirmed that I was radar identified and told me to continue towards Glasgow. I took up an approximate heading towards the airport, but did not confess my predicament. The controller asked me if I had the field in sight. I replied with an emphatic negative. He obviously got the message. "Roger," he responded. "If you were flying a surveillance radar approach, you would take up a heading of 330 and descend to 2,500 feet. He vectored me to final in level flight, then steered me along the final approach course and assigned me successively lower altitudes as I got nearer the runway. I eventually saw the approach lights of Glasgow's runway 06 at 800 feet. Nothing more was said. This plan may not work in Canada in the 21st century. Controllers are no longer trained to provide surveillance radar approaches, though no doubt they could improvise if you declared an emergency. Also in Canada, which is a bit bigger than Scotland, most of the airspace in which little airplanes fly is outside of radar coverage, at least until space-based ADS-B gets mandated. However, with the advent of GPS, there's another way to achieve the same result, which I'll now describe. You will have to be able to fly straight and level, make some gentle turns, and then descend straight ahead on instruments. If you doubt your ability to do this, get a safety pilot and go rub the rust off. Better still, have an instrument-rated instructor take you into actual cloud, so this will not be a completely novel experience. Today, most of us fly with our position displayed on a tablet or smartphone. In addition to this, the only assumption I'll make about your equipment is that you have a basic 6-pack of instruments, though a wing leveler is a huge advantage when it comes to keeping the airplane right side up. To emulate the surveillance radar approach situation, you need a plan which enables you to fly straight and level to a point on long final to a runway which has unobstructed approaches. Then start a continuous descent to the runway threshold. Let's assume you're on a VFR night flight from Peterborough, CYPQ, to North Bay, CYYB. When you're west of Stanhope, you find yourself in cloud. You're too low to get radar assistance. The first move when you find yourself in cloud is to get on the gauges and make sure the airplane is flying straight and level. Resist the temptation to keep peeking out of the windshield. If you follow this plan, you'll see the ground when you need to, on about a 2-mile final to a lighted runway. Quite possibly you've been scud running before you flew into cloud, so make sure you have enough ground clearance. Climb to at least 1,000 feet above the minimum safe altitude shown on the VFR navigation chart. In this example, that'll be 3,200 feet or higher. Check the outside air temperature. If it's below freezing, turn on the pitot heat and windshield heat. As an inexperienced rookie back in February 1969, I don't recollect looking at the temperature. Given the nighttime temperatures in Scotland in February, I guess I got lucky. Turn on the wing leveler if you have one. With the immediate emergency under control, you have to select an airfield where you'll carry out your Get Me Down plan. You could continue to North Bay, return to Peterborough, or divert to a nearby airfield. In deteriorating weather or freezing temperatures, finding an airport closer than North Bay is probably a good idea. That, with unobstructed approaches criterion, can be met if you choose an airport that has a published RNAV approach procedure. Such a procedure will ensure that, in all but a very few cases, the final approach course to the runway is unobstructed if you descend at the normal 3-degree approach gradient or steeper, at least down to about 500 feet above the airfield. Don't consider approaches that don't have a runway number in their title. They are either not aligned with the runway or too steep to fly straight in. So you're looking for a nearby airfield with an RNAV approach procedure. How can you confirm that an airfield has an RNAV approach if you don't have approaches loaded in your electronic flight bag? Well, at least on flightplan.com's Go app, the approaches are listed on the Airports tab under Procedures, even if you don't have them loaded. Your nearest airport in the assumed scenario is Stanhope, CND4, but it has no approaches. Muskoka, CYQA, is only 23 miles away, and it sounds more promising. The Go app says it has an RNAV approach to runways 18 and 36. The Canada Flight Supplement says the runway headings are 181 degrees and 001 degrees, that the lights are RCAL controlled, and that there's a 24-hour automatic weather broadcast on the AWOS frequency of 124.575. You'll need the runway headings to define the final intercept point shortly. How good does the weather have to be for a non-instrument rated pilot to stand a good chance of getting in? I'd suggest that this requires a ceiling of around 1,000 feet. If the ceiling is below this, you should probably look for a different destination. Copy the weather from the AWOS. Let's assume that it's 1200 overcast and 5 miles, so you should be able to execute your Get Me Down plan to a runway at Muskoka. For now, we'll head direct to the Muskoka Airport. Change your route to present position direct CYQA, then follow the route line. Now pick an en route altitude. Choose the lowest VFR altitude that gives you 1,000 feet clearance above the minimum safe altitudes you will traverse, determined from the VFR navigation chart. The highest minimum safe altitude between your present position and CYQA is 2,200 feet. So, to guarantee 1,000 feet obstacle clearance, we'll make our initial cruising altitude 3,500 feet. Next, we'll select the runway we're going to use and modify the route to join a long final for that runway. Let's assume that the wind is from 190 at 9, as it was when I made the screenshots for this video. So the active runway is going to be 18. To emulate the SRA scenario, you don't want to fly direct to the airport. You want to route to a final intercept fix on long final that will allow you to descend along the course published in the instrument approach procedure. You'll maintain your cruising altitude until after you turn onto the runway heading. One way to do this would be to follow the published RNAV procedure. If you have the approach charts loaded on your electronic flight bag, by all means do this, even if you're not instrument rated and don't have an IFR approved GPS. It still beats starting a descent in the middle of nowhere and waiting until bits fly off the airplane. Your electronic flight bag app has the fixes of the RNAV approach in its database, so you just need to enter them in the correct sequence. You'd modify your route to present position, IGVIL, SATM, OBNEP, CYQA, and follow the route line. You may be able to overlay the RNAV approach procedure on the VFR navigation chart to add to your situational awareness. However, most VFR pilots don't have the instrument approach procedures loaded on their electronic flight bag. This plan assumes that you are one of these most VFR pilots. Determine the point where your cruising altitude will intercept the descent slope to the runway. This will be your top of descent at which you start down. You'll then route via a point a mile or more further back, which will be your final intercept fix. This will give you a chance to get established on the final approach course in level flight before you have to start your descent. To establish the top of descent, you need to know the gradient of the final approach. This gradient should be such that the numbers can be worked out easily using mental arithmetic. A standard IFR approach typically has a 3-degree gradient, which works out at 318 feet per mile. That doesn't make for easy mental arithmetic. However, if you use a gradient of 3 miles per 1,000 feet, that gives you easy numbers to deal with. This works out at 3.1 degrees, just a shade steeper than the 3-degree standard. To determine where your cruising altitude will intercept the slope, multiply the height to be lost in thousands of feet by 3, giving you miles back from the runway. Inbound to Muskoka at 3,500 feet, the airfield elevation is 900 feet in round numbers, so you'll have 2,600 feet to lose. The 3.1 degree slope will be at this height at 2.6 times 3, or 7.8 miles from the runway. So your top of descent will be 7.8 miles at 3,500 feet. Add a mile and round it up to 9 miles in this case. So your final intercept fix will be 9 miles out from CYQA on the 001 radial. On the flightplan.com Go app, you specify the intercept point in the format destination ID /radial/distance. The radial will be the reciprocal of the runway heading you obtained from the Canada Flight Supplement. Clear your route and enter a new one. Present position, space CYQA /001/9. Check the numbers for the final intercept fix as you enter them, as once you hit the space bar, they will be converted to lat long and smaller errors won't be so obvious. And then add CYQA as your final destination. If your turn to final is a bit more than 90 degrees, you can rubber band your route to give you a less acute intercept angle. Follow this route to the final intercept point. As you approach this point in level cruising flight, configure the aircraft for the approach. Set your altimeter, adjust power and airspeed, put down approach flaps, and so forth. Also, if it's dark, make sure the runway lights are turned on. When you're about half a mile to run to the final intercept fix, turn onto the runway heading, plus or minus an allowance for the wind, and track the final approach course using the course deviation indicator, which gives a graphic indication of your distance left or right of the runway center line in nautical miles. When the distance to CYQA reaches your top of descent of 7.8 miles, start down at whatever power setting, airspeed and vertical speed you have determined from earlier practice will give you an approximate descent gradient of 1,000 feet per 3 miles. Check your altitude at each multiple of 3 miles back. At 6 miles, it should be close to 2,900 feet. Adjust power if required. At 3 miles, you should be at 1,900 feet. If you don't have the lights by 1,400 feet, that's 500 feet above the airfield, you'd better overshoot and go somewhere else. Once you're on the ground, cancel your declared emergency. Hopefully, you'll never need this plan, but if you do, I trust it will save your neck. Practice in VMC at a local airfield. In the meantime, blue skies and tailwinds.